not really a job, economic development type person, so I just have to plead ignorance on that
That's
question.
okay. Why don't you jump in?
Norfolk has a program in Virginia. Norfolk has a program, and I know Boston has a program. But so for me, Section 3, once I understood what the intent was and what the outcome is, I decided that I would learn more about what Section 3 is. And Dave Norris went to a conference, National Low Income Housing Coalition Conference, and heard some things about that. And then Holly Edwards, who was on City Council, they also went. They decided to come back. Our Julie, our chair is in the room of the Housing Authority Board. They decided to champion that and came back and championed it from using their power on City Council to say Charlottesville should be a Section 3 community. And they wrote a policy, and I think the Housing Authority wrote a policy too, I'm not sure. But they blessed it and started a program that really wasn't what it was supposed to do. It basically was just collecting names and checking the box. And once Holly left council, that sort of just went in a different direction. So there was no more commitment to it because it was something that her and Dave Norris was championing. But Dave Norris took his a little bit further by helping to build that SRO that single family occupancy. So I continue to just reach out, and most of my wins in the city of Charlottesville doesn't come from within. It usually comes from the relationships that I build outside. And so I knew Chicago was doing something. Where's Martha from?
Martha is from Tennessee.
I knew Tennessee was doing something. And there's another resident who was doing something. And I was like, well, you know, we've been talking about this thing for a year. Let's see how robust we can be with doing Section 3. And so when Grant Duffield came on board, I started bugging him about Section 3. So every time he met with me with somebody, I was talking about Section 3. And then JR came to town and was talking about Section 3, and then Legal Aid had a conference, and he was a speaker here, and I said, can we have a group meeting just so we can talk about Section 3? And we did, and so we kind of nailed it down to say, let's go to Chicago. And it was January 15th, in the midst of the winter.
It's the best time to come to Chicago.
In Chicago baptized.
They laughed at me because I was bungled up. I had a hat on, I had an earmuffs on, and he said, we didn't see any earmuffs in Chicago in a while. But anyway, we went there, and so I don't know what I was expecting, but when we got to CHA, and saw their one-stop shop for Section 3, Audra Oliver was with me. I mean, we were just like, and Brandon and Elaine, yes, and Elaine, we were just so outdone because it was truly a one-stop shop. I've always said that what's out there on High Charlotte Road is not a one-stop shop. It doesn't work for the people. People go in, they sign in, and that's about it. They sign in, but they don't really get any results. If you walk into their office and you sign in, you're in. When you walk out, you're walking out with something. And if you walk out with nothing, it's because you chose to walk out with nothing. But before we got to CHA's office, we met with Cornelius and his crew to talk about and show us how he was doing, you know, some SROs and how he was redoing public housing and how he was doing affordable housing, and told us about his program. And so I think John is his name, right?
Yes.
So he said, and John goes out in the field and he's in the office and he's, he's working hand in hand with the clients. Well, we didn't tell him we was going to that office. We came to visit him because we want to see what a Section 3 business truly looked like. And when we walked in, who was the first person we saw sitting with a client at the computer, holding their hands to do what needed to be done, was John. And it's truly, to me, that's truly what I want to see here in the city of Charlottesville. It's, I am not I'm not as computer literate like some of y'all is, right? So I know there's a whole lot of other folks who's not as computer literate as I am, and everything is on computer now. But when you go to that one-stop shop out of it, that's not what you get. What you get is you go and you search. A Section 3 program here will give people some hope. You've heard about Crescent Halls. And I just want to just really, really quick tell you what really happened, why Crescent Halls is really having those problems. Years ago, I served on the Housing Authority Board. And I go to the conferences and I learn things and I take it back home to use it because that's what you say you're supposed to do. But when I come back to use it, everybody looks at me like I'm speaking Spanish, French, or Patois, right? They don't understand. And so HUD came up with this thing where you can conform your units into asset management. But we don't have over 500 units. We have 376. So we really didn't have to go to asset management. And once we went into asset management, what ended up happening, you have certain units in different amps. And Crescent Hall is one of those amps that stand alone. So here is what is going on. Crescent Halls is a senior development with disabled people. It does not generate enough income to do what it needs to do. The capital budget gets cut. The operating subsidy is to fix daily things, but if you have a major problem, then capital will do that. But when it was fluid, where you didn't have an amp, you could fix those things quickly. But now that it is standing alone, it's actually draining the Housing Authority budget, and they have to find the funds to do that. I'm not saying that they don't have money to do routine maintenance, but major things like that, it takes time. However, I did not see anyone in this community who could have helped stepped up to the plate and say, since you don't have the money, let's help. So that's just one thing I wanted to put out there. But for Section 3, learning from others is how I think that we can, and I know there's a council in the room, I'm not trying to put her on the spot, but champion this, Ms. Hill. Please champion this. We will support you on this one because this is a way to give people economic disparities haven't changed. And we can build all these nice things and we can come up with all these nice programs. But if we don't help lower people build wealth, then we're just not serving who we need to serve. And I truly believe that this community can wrap its head around with the help of these folks, because Chicago said, we will help you we will give you the software. We will show you how to do it. And then, we have Cornelius here, who is a Section 3 business who can really help to see. So I'm just excited. Audrey was yesterday, after she heard him talking, she said, I'm so excited. And I just can't hide it. Is that how that sounds?
I think I like it.
So that's kind of where I'm at. I just want to see something truly. And again, remember the 5 tiers. Do you all remember the 5 tiers? Y'all don't, because y'all ain't saying that. But it's not, but the 5 tiers is just not, it's not just public housing, y'all, but we are championing it. It's not just public housing. And it's not just money that is going to housing authority. It's federal dollars. I learned something yesterday, because we don't provide the services, but federal dollars go through other services, such as social service, such as transportation, so see, I'm learning that those are still money that should be a part of Section 3.
Can I ask a first question I'll take my moderator's prerogative. One of the things that has come up in this panel is obviously there's a scale difference between Chicago and Charlottesville.
Right.
And I'm wondering if the panelists can speak a little bit about what they might see as challenges or opportunities for us in a much smaller environment. And I'm going to hit Cornelius first because you mentioned your small project might be our large projects.
Yeah, so I think one of the things I noticed, we took a tour yesterday throughout a few developments here in Charlottesville, and one of the things that stood out to me as a contractor and engineer and developer was the difference in wage scale. So in Chicago, a carpenter makes $79.37 an hour, which is a pretty decent job for a carpenter in Chicago. So that's what we pay our carpenters. I was told here that a carpenter on a good day makes about $15 an hour. So, but that wasn't the thing that struck me the most, right? Because if a carpenter makes $15 an hour, but the cost of living is appropriate, then it all washes itself away. But when I went to a housing authority development and then walked down the street and turned a corner, and there was a luxury condo building where they were selling condos for $500,000, I had to ask myself, how is it possible that the labor to build the facility is $15 an hour, but the cost to sell it is $500,000, right? So somebody there is making a lot of money, and it's not the folks that are putting in the effort to build it. Because those condos are comparable to what you would build in Chicago for the same price. So if you could build something at the same scale for the same price and sell it for the same cost in Chicago that you do in Charlottesville, but the cost to build it is almost 75% less, then where are those dollars going if they're not circulating back into the community? Well, I happen to be staying at the Hampton Inn, which is a nice, my type of hotel. It's cheaper, right? It's not the expensive hotel. But I was having a conversation with some electricians that were sitting in the lobby on my first night there. And I'm asking them, where do I go to get a good burger? And it was about 4 or 5 of them there, and all of them told me, well, we're not even from here. We go to the local Pizza Hut. That's where we get to eat for free, and we've been here for 3 months building that nice luxury condo building across the street, and then we're gonna get on a plane and we're going back home. So home isn't even here because the workforce is being brought in to build a facility. So no one is taking part in the community in building the actual facilities that are gonna eventually be here where others are gonna come and live. So I think for us, or for me, that was huge. That was a wake-up call to see that the cost of living is no different than what it costs to live in Chicago, the 3rd largest city in the country. But the cost to build is 75% cheaper. And that's a big gap between cost to build and cost to sell. And somebody is pocketing dollars and it's not going back into the community. So that always tends to bother me, especially when you are a builder of affordable housing.
Thank you. How about from the public housing point of view?
You have to have the support of your mayor. The city, you need the support of city officials. That's the first step.
Well, for here, I believe it's it's not, it would be the mayor, the city manager, and state officials. Because I learned something about a dealing rule or something like that, like so the city cannot mandate a lot of things on the developers. It's something that has to happen on the state level. And to Eric's point, there needs to be some statewide organizing. So our mayor didn't voluntarily just wake up one day, I'm doing Section 3. I told you we was doing it for some decades, right? We were fighting, like I was a young guy when I started, right? But we kept our foot on their neck, right? And finally, you know, our mayor woke up and saw this could benefit everybody. Cause nothing beats a bullet like a job. And we used to tell him, I don't know too many young guys, you really wanna stop this violence, get them some jobs and opportunity. Cause I don't know too many people shooting and selling drugs on their lunch break, right? You know, so we give them an opportunity, it's so beneficial for the community. And to C point, you gotta hire from within the community. I mean, it's tons of money being made. And it's just isn't a low income issue. It's your tax dollars. This is a federal mandate. The federal government said whenever we give federal funds out for infrastructure, housing, anything, there's a Section 3 requirement. But if you got these lobbyist groups, these realtor associations, everybody pushing against it so that the developers can keep that profit margin, there lies the problem. But then there's something besides government you can go after, like the developer himself. When we had problems before they enforced Section 3 in Chicago, we shut down the site. It's a misdemeanor. Everything is a misdemeanor with the development site, right? We'll chain ourselves together by the gates, block the gates with cards, take a rest until we got people in the neighborhood. Well, no, I'm not encouraging nobody to get arrested for legal reasons, all right? But you gotta struggle if you want victory. You gotta push the envelope. And it just cannot be the low-income folks doing this. It's me today, you tomorrow. And that's something I learned during the foreclosure crisis, right? When they were tearing down public housing, a lot of folks said that's not my problem. Then folks started losing the middle class and working class lost their home, right? And then they saw that it was their problem. So the saying is me today and you tomorrow. So my challenge is to the middle class folks, right? I don't think a lot of y'all can afford a $500,000 condo.
No, sir.
So you gotta fight together. You have to fight together.
It's open for questions.
One over there, too.
Thank you. I'm from Durham, North Carolina, so a lot of similarities and a lot of differences too. But my question is, in North Carolina, we've got a really reactionary state legislator. In Durham, we've got a very progressive city council. And so there's the will in Durham to make changes around this stuff, but I think kind of like in Virginia, the state takes away a lot of powers from the city. So the state says, you can't pass minimum wage ordinances, you can't actually mandate at the city level that the wage be higher than $7.25. And they've also deprived us of the ability to mandate that there be affordable units in new developments. Like, these are all things that happen at the state level. So one of my questions is, kind of from a legal perspective, are there workarounds to that? Are there ways that we can, obviously the long-term goal has to be to take back the state, but that's a bigger project. So what can we do now on a local level legally, and then what can we do on a local level extra legally? Given those kind of confines from state and federal forces.
Yeah, I've been in Virginia for about 1.5 years. Before that, I was in Seattle for about 12 years, and before that, I was in Detroit for about 5 years. And when I moved here and learned about Dillon's rule, I was like, what is this? You know, in Seattle, if a community was suffering from a particular problem and the state legislature wasn't going to do anything about it, you always had the option of trying to do something locally. And you know, we talked earlier about source of income discrimination and landlords not willing to take vouchers. There are a number of local communities in Washington, Seattle, Bellevue, which is one of the suburbs, Redmond, where Microsoft is located, Kirkland, the city of Tacoma, the city of Vancouver, Washington, all adopted local anti-source of income discrimination ordinances because the state refused to act. Now, just earlier this month, the state of Washington actually passed that statewide. But until then, the people in the local communities weren't paralyzed. They weren't unable to do anything for themselves because they could act locally and get those things passed. When I was in Detroit in the early 2000s, one of the things I worked on was getting a local anti-predatory lending ordinance passed in the city. And we worked on it for 2 years with the NAACP and the AARP, and we finally got it through the city council And then what happened was the state legislature, on like the day before Christmas, passed like the Fair Lending in Michigan law to preempt it, which was terrible, but at least they had to pass a specific law to take away that one thing. There were plenty of other things we could do locally in Detroit, to protect people from exploitation and other problems, because Michigan's what's considered a home rule state. There's no Dillon's rule. The local governments can do anything the state hasn't explicitly preempted. So I think maybe kind of a long-term goal in Virginia might be to get rid of this Dillon's rule, because it's very repressive. I mean, I have to imagine that this comes from, centuries of this is a way to maintain wealth and power where it's always been. That's a big problem, but I think it only changes when people do organize and push for these things. I feel like there was part of your question that I am forgetting about.
Are there
Workarounds, oh yeah, this is the other thing I wanted to mention. There is part of the Federal Fair Housing Act, which got a lot of attention during the last administration in a good way, and is now getting a fair amount of attention in a bad way during the new administration. When the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, it included a provision that requires recipients of federal HUD money to affirmatively further fair housing in their communities. And the way that this has traditionally been done is that when local governments go through their city planning process, they have to do an analysis of impediments to fair housing, things that basically cause or perpetuate residential segregation. Look for the causes of those things and adopt strategies to address those problems and build more inclusive and fair communities. Under the Obama administration, a new rule was adopted by HUD that kind of restructured the way this works, and HUD provided a lot more data, a lot more information for communities to look at, and required a much more robust analysis with particular benchmarks and so forth that communities were going to have to meet in order to make sure that they were promoting affordable housing and addressing some of the problems that we've heard about. Making sure people that work in the community can live in the community, can afford to live in the community, and finding ways of basically cycling that money back to the workers is what part of this is all about. The HUD secretary, Dr. Carson, well, he's not dining at his new $31,000 table. Another thing he's been busy doing is trying to get rid of this rule. They've already sort of unilaterally suspended it until like 2022 or something, and now they're working on trying to get rid of it. And basically, so even though the statute requires communities to take these affirmative steps, and if they don't, they can disqualify themselves from receiving HUD funds. They want this to just kind of remain one of the toothless laws on the books. So that's an example of a workaround where I think a community could go through an analysis and say, we need to do this in order to have more inclusive communities. This is an impediment to fair housing in our community, and we need to enact this inclusionary zoning law, or we need to enact this fair wage or living wage ordinance, or whatever it might be. We're required to do this in order to have fair housing. And a state can't take that away because it's a federal law. So I think there's a lot of potential there.
Jared, can you jump in on what action did you?
You trying to get me arrested or something? Okay, get other people arrested. So extra legally, stop me legal folks in the room if I say anything that might incriminate myself. So here's what I'm disturbed about before I get into the extra legal thing. It's been almost a year since 45 President Trump has been in office.